All right, so this is the new Garmin Venu 4, and Garmin did something kind of interesting with this watch where this looks very similar to the previous generation Venu 3, but this watch now has nearly the exact same feature set as their Forerunner 570. So it's bringing in a lot of the same sport profiles, health feedback, training feedback, as well as even multi-band GPS for increased accuracy. But they've also added an LED flashlight. But being that this is now pretty much in line with their 570, it makes it a much more capable sports watch. But they're also introducing some new health features here, including a new health status feature, which keeps track of your health stats to see if you're in range or out of range. There's also a new lifestyle logging feature, which allows you to log daily habits and see how they may align with your health metrics, as well as new sleep coaching features. So in this video, I'll be going over everything new with the Venu 4, as well as how it differs from the previous generation Venu 3, as well as the Forerunner 570. And then in about a week or two, I'll have my full in-depth review of the Venu 4 to see if it actually performs. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and get a notification when that video comes out. And if you do happen to find the information in this video to be useful, just do me a quick favor and hit that like button down below. So the first thing that we need to talk about is price, and this comes in at $100 more than the previous generation Venu 3, which is basically kind of the trend that we're seeing with most new Garmin products lately. But this is the same price as the Forerunner 570, which makes sense for the most part considering that the feature set is nearly the same between these two, but there are some exceptions. But I'll have more thoughts about price later on in the video. All right, so just like the previous generation, this comes in two different sizes, a 41mm version as well as a 45mm version. But interestingly, although their website says 45mm, from my measurements, it looks to be closer to 46. I mean, no real meaningful difference, but just thought I'd mention it. And unfortunately, I don't have the smaller Venu 4 to measure up, but their website does list the specs as being the same. However, the case thickness actually did increase a little bit here, and I'm guessing that may have something to do with the built-in LED flashlight. And another thing that's sort of different here is that they've actually dropped the S name from the smaller version. So now it's just the 41 and 45mm options, which goes along with what Garmin basically has done with their other devices now. So the first upgrade that they made here is in the material. So with the previous Venu 3, so that had a stainless steel bezel, but with the Venu 4, this now has more stainless steel as part of the case itself. However, the back is still going to be made out of plastic. But with more metal in the construction, as well as probably a little bit more inside in terms of the components like the flashlight, it is also a smidge heavier, but it's still a nice, lightweight, comfortable watch. And the displays are also going to be the same size as before, as well as the same resolution. But with the Venu 4, so this does get Garmin's latest generation AMOLED displays that do get brighter. And this is going to be similar to their Venu X1, their Forerunner 970 and 570, as well as their most recent Phoenix 8 Pros, where these can get crazy bright. Now, something I'm still really holding out hope for are more brightness levels, where their AMOLED displays only have 3 different levels to choose from. And in my opinion, these displays are almost like too bright even at their lowest brightness settings, at least indoors. I definitely certainly appreciate the increased brightness outdoors, but I really like to see more options for use indoors. And then to get around the device, so this uses a combination of a touchscreen along with 2 buttons. So this is where it's going to be different than their Forerunner 570, which has 5 buttons as well as a touchscreen. So with this makes it so the Venu 4 has a cleaner look to it and may be better for anyone who wants something that looks more like a traditional watch without all the buttons. But this does mean that you have to use the watch with the touchscreen to operate it in a lot of areas. Whereas the 570, you have the option of using the touchscreen or the 5 buttons. And I think the trade-off here is that with the 570, that looks more like a sports and fitness watch, where this has a cleaner look to it. And then with the buttons, so these are also going to be a little bit different as well, where you'll still access all your sport profiles using the upper right-hand button, and then the lower button still acts as a back button from anywhere in the interface. However, long pressing these buttons is a little bit different now, where before you'd long press the lower button to access settings, but now long pressing the lower button enables the built-in LED flashlight, and then you'll be able to use the touchscreen to change brightness levels or switch it to a red LED, which may be easier on the eyes at night. And then if you long press the upper button, so this brings up the controls menu just like before, but this has been redesigned a little bit. And then from here, you'll be able to access the full settings. And by the way, if this settings option isn't here for you, you can just add that by tapping on the add right here and then adding that to your controls menu. But they did actually remove the additional 3rd button that was there on the previous Venu 3, where you could assign that as a shortcut button to access more commonly used apps or functions. And I sort of liked having that capability on the Venu 3, so I don't know, it's a little bit of a bummer it's not on the Venu 4. And then on the smartwatch side of things, so this is going to be nearly the same as the Venu 3, where you'll get notifications and all that good stuff, and you can also take calls on the watch itself using its built-in microphone and speaker, but do note that your phone has to be connected and in range, as this doesn't have built-in cellular capabilities. And then in addition to that, you'll also be able to access the voice assistant of your choice, whether that's going to be Siri or Google, but again, if your phone is connected and in range. However, something new with the Venu 4 is that there's also their voice command feature where you can control certain functions on your watch, like starting a workout, setting an alarm or timer, or maybe even accessing a setting that's buried deep in the menus. And then just like before, this also has offline music capabilities using Spotify, Deezer, as well as Amazon Music, and then it also does have Garmin Pay for contactless payments. But there's also some new features surrounding accessibility, where there's a new spoken watch face feature where it can actually speak out the time of day as well as different health data using the built-in speaker, as well as receive those alerts every hour.
Intensity minutes, 350 minutes. Today, 0 minutes. Steps, 3,331.
And then there's also some new color filters for the display if you experience different forms of color blindness, where you can choose from new display options depending on what may work best for you. And then when it comes to battery life, so this is going to be pretty similar on these smaller models, where that's going to be around 10 days just using them as a smartwatch if you're not using the always on display mode. And then with the larger version, so this is just going to be slightly less than the previous generation at up to 12 days while not using the always on display, which is down from the 14 from before. And then if you do want to use the always on display mode on the larger version, that's going to be 5 days versus 4 days from before. And then when it comes to health features, so the Venu 4 comes with their 5th generation heart rate sensor, just like the previous version. So this is where you can track your heart rate 24 hours a day. It'll track your HRV, your heart rate variability during sleep. It can also track your skin temperature. You can also track your blood oxygen saturation levels, and it also can track any breathing variations you may have throughout the night. And then just like the previous Venu 3, this also has ECG capabilities, but this is actually a big difference between the Venu 4 and the Forerunner 570, where even though the 570 does have their 5th generation heart rate sensor, it doesn't have ECG capabilities because it doesn't have the additional necessary hardware. But they're adding some new features that kind of bring a lot of these health metrics together. So the first of which is their health status feature. So what this does is that it tracks your heart rate variability, blood oxygen saturation levels, as well as any breathing variations you may have throughout the night, and kind of puts them all in one place to see if all your metrics collected during sleep are in line and in your typical range, or maybe they may be out of range, which could be clues to, let's say, if you're getting ill or maybe like had too much alcohol or something like that. And it should take around 3 weeks to get a health status, so it has enough data to establish those baselines. However, if you've already been wearing a Garmin watch that has these metrics, it should pull in that data from your previous watch. But for some reason or another, it's not appearing on this watch quite yet, so I'm gonna have to follow up with that in my in-depth review. And then related to that, there's also their new lifestyle logging feature where you can log daily habits such as caffeine intake, exercise, stretching, cold showers, and basically over 40 different predefined habits, but you can also create custom habits. And after 4 weeks of logging this data, you'll be able to get custom reports on how these habits may line up with particular health metrics. So let's say you slept really well. Well, that could maybe correlate to meditation at night. Or if you didn't sleep well and had a lower HRV than normal, well, that could maybe line up with like a late meal or consuming alcohol. Now, what's kind of nice about both the health status feature as well as the lifestyle logging feature is that these are actually more Garmin Connect features and aren't necessarily Venu 4 features. So anyone in the Garmin wearable can actually use these features. However, there are going to be some differences in terms of which watch you have. So for instance, if you have a watch that doesn't collect HRV, you won't actually see that in these features. And then in addition to that, there's only going to be certain watches where you can actually log habits directly on the watch itself versus the Garmin Connect app. And at this point, it's just the Venu 4 where you can do it on the watch itself. But I'd anticipate this will come to other watches via a software update, as well as new watches, of course. And then when it comes to sleep tracking, so the Venu 4 will track your sleep along with your sleep stages just like before, but they've added some new features surrounding the sleep coach side of things where it can give you an indication of how well aligned your sleep is with your natural circadian rhythm, as well as how consistent you are with your sleep schedule. So like here, it shows that it's recommending that I get 9 hours of sleep, which I'd probably say is the minimum considering some of the data that we're going to see here in a second. But then if we scroll up, here's what it'll give a breakdown of how much sleep I need, my sleep alignment, my sleep duration, as well as my sleep consistency. So with my sleep needs, so here's where it shows different factors to why I may need more or less sleep, including my recent sleep history, as well as activity history and HRV status. So basically how well I've slept recently, which that's kind of been adding up, any workouts or training that I've been doing, which contributes to how much rest I may need, as well as my HRV or HRV status, which can be an indicator of how well I'm recovering. And then for sleep alignment, so what this is trying to do is assess how well my sleep timing actually lines up with my body's natural circadian rhythm. But as you can see here, this does take me actually sleeping with this particular watch to get a baseline, which is honestly a little bit weird to me considering I already have all my sleep history and health metrics from my other Garmin wearable. And then from there, this shows my sleep history, which is obviously really absolutely horrendous lately, and that's just due to an absolutely crazy month of new sports tech. And that's all for you guys, by the way. So if you do like all this content, just like hit that like button down below. And then finally, there's also sleep consistency, and this is about how well you're maintaining your sleep schedule. So this is slightly different than sleep alignment, where that's trying to assess how well your sleep schedule lines up with your body's natural circadian rhythm, which is based on data that's collecting, where sleep consistency is about how well you're maintaining your sleep schedule, regardless of whether or not that actually aligns with your circadian rhythm. And then on the sports side of things, so they've added a lot of new workout types to the Venu 4, and some highlights is that it now has triathlon support and multi-sport profiles. There's more cycling profiles. There's now more outdoor recreation profiles, including rucking with a weighted vest, as well as plenty of others that you can see on the screen right now. But then there's also this sort of new mixed session workout profile type where you'll be able to link different workouts together. So let's say you want to do different workouts in the gym, like start with some weights, then do some running, and then maybe finish off with some high intensity interval training. So what you do here is you start the mixed session on your watch, do your first session of whatever you'd like to do. Then when you're ready to move on to the next activity, you'd press pause and then scroll down and choose the next activity. And then rinse and repeat doing all the things. And then when you're finally done, you just press save, and all those activities are grouped together in the Garmin Connect app as a multi-sport activity. And the reason I say sort of new is that this is actually similar functionality to their change sport function that they have in some of their more sports focused watches, where if you do want to switch to another activity during any activity, you'll just access the settings and then you can change the sport from there, and then you can choose another sport. And then same deal where you can just keep on choosing another sport and so on, and all that gets grouped together as a multi-sport activity in Garmin Connect. So I think the confusing part to me is that although we do have this new capability of linking workouts together, we have to know that we're going to be doing more than one activity in a session, because the only way to do this is to start with that mixed session activity profile on the Venu 4, where with watches that do have the change sport function, you can do that from any sport that you'd like. So I think they may have kind of like overthought that whole mixed session activity profile a bit, where I think all they needed to do is add that next activity option to the pause screen on any watch, whether that's the Venu 4 or the watches that have that change sport function, which to access that, you actually have to go into the settings, which makes that kind of confusing. And one more thing to note about that mixed session activity profile is that although your activity is saved in Garmin Connect as a single multi-sport activity, which each individual activity broken out, each individual activity will actually be sent over to Strava as separate activities, but this is the norm with any multi-sport watch, and this is more of a Strava limitation than a Garmin limitation. But another upgrade they made with the Venu 4 is that this now has a multi-band or dual-band satellite chipset, and what this does is that it's able to deliver better accuracy in situations where you may have objects that are interfering with a clear view of the sky, which can block satellite signals. So let's say like heavy tree cover or some tall buildings. And what this does is that it's able to use two different satellite frequencies at the same time to deliver better accuracy. But the thing about dual band or multi-band satellite connectivity is that it requires more power, but Garmin has an answer for that with their auto select mode. And what this does is that it dynamically switches between a higher accuracy dual band mode versus the single band mode based on the situation that you're in. So let's say you're out in the wide open where there's nothing like interfering with the clear view of the sky. It can use a lower accuracy mode to save on power, and then if it detects there's something like blocking a clear view of the sky, it can switch to a higher accuracy mode. And what's nice about this is that this is all done on the fly. And this mode should be set by default, by the way, and this is the mode that I use on all my Garmin watches, and it works great. So I suggest to just leave it in that mode for the best balance of battery life and accuracy. And then on the training feedback side of things, so this is also going to be a big upgrade from the Venu 3, where you're going to get quite a bit more, including training status, which tracks how productive or unproductive your training may be. It also has features like VO2 max for both running as well as cycling. And it also has Garmin's training readiness feature, which gives you an indication of how ready you are for your next workout or your race. And then when it comes to external sensors, so this list also expands quite a bit from the previous generation, where you can now pair up electronic shifting if you happen to have one of those on your bike, in-reach devices for satellite communication, as well as pairing it with their bike computers, as well as golf club sensors. So they definitely added quite a bit to the Venu 4, and I think it's also great that they're trying to keep basically the same feature set as the 570. However, there are some differences, and I think the big ones are that the Venu 4 has ECG, as well as a built-in LED flashlight, which the 570 doesn't have. So the pricing is actually going to be a little bit confusing, where I think the 570 should probably be like $50 cheaper considering the additional features of the Venu 4. However, the 570 does have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to using it with more buttons along with the touchscreen. In any case, lots more with the Venu 4, and I've actually got a lot of testing to do here, so be on the lookout for my full in-depth review of it. That'll be coming up soon, and there's also a lot of other videos on some other sports tech that'll keep you busy in the meantime, so make sure to check those out. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.